Please, John.
Yeah, I particularly like the way this this talk was flagged up there. Nice to get access to treatment. It is nice to get access to treatment. It's slight kind of misphrasing of that anyway. I'll explain what I mean by that as we go through this. So the title that I really wanted to give this is the role of advocates in health technology assessments. Okay, I'll explain what I mean by health technology assessments, and you'll see how we go. Okay, so 3 aims for this short talk: what are health technology assessments? What can advocates do to improve the outcome of HTAs? And specifically, I'll talk about a particular HTA that took place in the UK over the past few years. So an HTA, a health technology assessment, is a process for deciding whether a new drug, a device, or a method of treatment represents value for money. Okay? Extremely important process. In this particular context, it is separate from the process of deciding whether a drug is safe. Okay, so HTAs are all about whether or not it's a good idea from an economic point of view to fund a particular drug. Okay, now central to this process, at least in the way that the process is applied in the UK, and I believe this is quite common in other countries, although I'm not an expert even in the UK process, let alone other parts of the world. But central to this process is the idea of what they call a quality-adjusted life year. Okay. Now, in many contexts and in many advocacy settings, the QALY, as it's known, is an infamous term. Okay, there's lots and lots of discussion about whether the methodology, the precise methodology that is used to calculate QALYs, and even the fact whether QALYs are a valid way of discussing health economics, this is up for debate. Nevertheless, if we take a step back from the specific methodology used here, and even the terminology, the principle, I believe, is kind of unlikely to change. The idea, the fundamental principle is we need a process for deciding whether a drug either extends life, it improves life, or it does both. Okay, and the QALY principle is a recognition that there's a difference between having a year of perfect life, of perfect health, or having a year where your health is basically impaired to some extent, but at least you're alive. Okay, so the QALY methodology tries to differentiate between those. It's on a spectrum of how well you are during your life and how well you feel. Okay, so an HTA is clearly necessary because if we're talking about making decisions about funding one drug versus another, we need a systematic and consistent way of making those decisions. And HTAs are all about trying to do that on a repeatable and a transparent basis. So, what role do advocates play in this process? Okay, so my understanding, and as I say, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that the HTA process is similar in principle everywhere, but it's actually quite different in implementation, and that especially goes in terms of how input from patients is treated and how it's gathered. The most important thing that people like us do in HTAs is to explain how the proposed drug, let's concentrate on drugs for the time being, how the proposed drug improves the quality of life that patients have, okay? And in doing so, we need to consider all the different ways that quality of life can be improved, okay? So we're not only talking about the way in which the drug reduces symptoms, lessens the physical impact of the illness on our lives, but we're also talking about the psychological impact that having the illness has, either through its the effect it has on our body and therefore on our brain, but also simply the fact of suffering with an incurable disease, okay, and the psychological impact that represents, But then going even further than that and talking about the economic impact that having a disease has, not only upon us, on our reduced capacity to contribute to the economy, either by earning or by spending, both of which are genuine impacts that the disease has, but also on the wider group of people around us, our families, if we essentially bring somebody else out of the economy because they have to care for us, that's the economic impact of our illness. Okay, so an HTA needs to assess all of these different aspects of the impact of the disease, and then of course not only measuring all the different kind of dimensions of the impact, but also obviously measuring the quantity, the magnitude of those impacts, and how much that quality of life is affected. Now, individual patient stories. Sorry, my slides got a bit squeezed up here. I'm struggling to read this. Individual patient stories have a lot of impact with assessors. Okay, so I'll talk a bit about what the process kind of looks like in reality in a minute. But when an individual patient presents in one of these health technology forums, the individual impact that a particular individual story is very impactful. However, one of the roles that patient organizations have, who are generally also valid contributors to the process, one of the impacts that the organizations have is that they provide a much wider view, as well as if you like, the emotive impact that an individual patient provides, crucially important. The additional picture that a patient organization can paint is this is the wider impact. This is the size of the community we're talking about. This is the average, or this is the generalized impact that the disease has. And particularly if we can do that in a systematic, demonstrable way, if we've got data to back that up, the impact is much more effective. And this, I think, is one of the crucial roles that organizations like us can play. So now I'm just going to talk very briefly about a particular HTA that took place in the UK over the past few years. And if I'm honest, I don't think this is particularly a poster child for HTAs, for MPNs, because we've only been partially successful. In actual fact, in many other countries, ruxolitinib has much greater. There is much greater access to Jakavi in other countries. Okay, so we didn't in the UK. Our own HTA hasn't been nearly as successful as in other parts of the world, but nevertheless, I wanted to explain a little bit about the process. So, there's been multiple phases to this story in the UK, and I'm not going to go into the detail of that. But fundamentally, patients were represented in the process, firstly by a few specific, very committed, very persuasive individuals who did an amazing job of explaining to the committees about the impact on them individually. And then secondly, two different patient organizations, Leukemia Care, who I know are represented here this weekend by my friend Zach, and MPN Voice, and we were represented by a colleague of mine called Caroline, who did an amazing job of presenting in a very unemotive and very but nevertheless extremely powerful way to the committee about the overall impact of myelofibrosis. The method of doing this is essentially through a combination of a written submission, which generally goes along the form of a relatively standardized kind of questionnaire that the process presents to the patient representatives. So it's in the form of responses to specific questions, but then you get a section where you can fill in a much more kind of flexible way about an account of the impact of the disease, and then on top of the written submissions, then there's a big meeting where the submissions are presented. You get actually given a fixed amount of time in minutes to present yourself and your organization. Did I do that? I don't think I touched that.
That's automatic when your time is over.
All right. It was successful. That's all. That's what I want to wrap up with. Okay. There's plenty. Look, actually, when the slides go up on the website, look, further reading. So this explains much more about how the process works. There's a really nice part of the UPATI website. I don't think anybody's mentioned UPATI so far this weekend. There's a really nice document on UPATI about how HTAs work in general. And then you can read all about the actual story with NICE. NICE, by the way, is the HTA body in the UK. Okay, that's enough.